Let's start this off by looking at the description of your video where you claim to have busted Anita Sarkeesian. You then attempt to refute Anita by focusing on her use of a 35-second clip from Hitman Absolution, which constitutes only 2% of her video and less than 0.5% of the over 2 hours of Tropes vs. Women in Video Games series that she'd released up to that point. Tip for skeptics. Blatant hypocrisy is often a sign that logical fallacies are not far behind. But are you trying to refute her arguments? No. You are trying to accuse her of being a dishonest liar.
Her level of dishonesty beggars belief. It really does just beggar belief. Jesus Christ, woman, you are a liar without shame.
Ad hominem. Attacking the arguer instead of the argument. Poisoning the well. A type of ad hominem where adverse information about a target is presented with the intention of discrediting everything that the target person says. You then lead your viewers to believe that because 2% of her video is a lie, that her entire argument is invalid. Hasty Generalization. Basing a broad conclusion on a small sample.
Cherry-picking a tiny fraction of the video and manipulating and misrepresenting it out of all proportion.
She was not trying to misrepresent the game. She was only using the clip to help prove her point.
Welcome to our multi-part video series exploring the roles and representations of women in video games. This project will examine the tropes, plot devices, and patterns most commonly associated with women in gaming from a systemic, big-picture perspective.
In fact, Thunderfoot, it is you who is misrepresenting both Hitman Absolution and Anita Sarkeesian.
This is how she describes Hitman Absolution.
Players are meant to derive a perverse pleasure from desecrating the bodies of unsuspecting virtual female characters. It's a rush streaming from a carefully concocted mix of sexual arousal connected to the act of controlling and punishing representations of female sexuality.
Her video series is about tropes, not specific video games. She is not describing Hitman Absolution. She is describing how the women as background decoration trope is exploited in games, and is simply using Hitman as an example.
So in many of the titles we've been discussing, the game makers have set up a series of possible scenarios involving vulnerable, eroticized female characters.
She is simply using the clip to illustrate her point that some games include sexualized female characters who are not central to the gameplay and serve no actual purpose in the context of the game, and so she is left to assume that in the absence of any other reason for including them, their inclusion in the game is a fair example of the trope she is talking about.
I define the women as background decoration trope in video games as the subset of largely insignificant, non-playable female characters whose sexuality or victimhood is exploited as a way to infuse edgy, gritty, or racy flavoring into game worlds. These sexually objectified female bodies are designed to function as environmental texture, while titillating presumed straight male players.
You then accuse her of misrepresenting the game because
you're meant to be a hitman. You're not going around killing random people. Indeed, you're penalized for killing people who are not your target, and even more so for killing innocent civilians. That is, the game actively disincentivizes killing random people like the girls in the strip club.
Really? Actively disincentivizes players? By reducing the player's total score a little bit? In a scoring system that actually allows for negative scores? I think it's pretty clear that this is in fact a very passive disincentive, considering the prompts are small, out of the way, and are not accompanied by any other kind of notification to the user. Clearly, this is the least developers could do to disincentivize players.
Most of them sneaked past the dancers like you're meant to do, and none of them actually attacked or killed the dancers, because you would get penalized for it.
Not to mention, there's nothing stopping the player from just reloading the game to subvert the penalty altogether. But really, this is all irrelevant because the player can very easily reverse the penalty by simply hiding the body. So clearly the game does not actively disincentivize players from abusing the NPCs. But you were too busy accusing Anita of misrepresenting the game to notice that in fact, you were misrepresenting the game.
So I watched a playthrough of the missions, of which there were plenty. I watched about 40 or so of these people playing the mission. Turns out there are 2 ways of doing it. And only one of those takes you past the girls doing their makeup, and one doesn't. So about 3/4 went the easier route, and about 1/4 went past the dancers. Most of them sneaked past the dancers like you're meant to do, and none of them actually attacked or killed the dancers.
Hitman Absolution sold millions of copies, but you believe watching 40 playthroughs is sufficient evidence to claim that no one who plays the game would attack or kill the strippers. Playthroughs are often created by players who have already completed the game and are trying to show others their gameplay skills or the most efficient way through a game. Of course none of them would waste time attacking or killing the strippers. Selection bias. The bias that occurs when the selection of data points isn't sufficiently random to draw a general conclusion. Spotlight fallacy. When observed data is incorrectly assumed to represent a different or larger group. Furthermore, if, as you claim, the strippers were meant to be sneaked past, then why are they there at all? Why not put another guard there, or a bouncer, or just leave the room empty? Again, you are actually helping to illustrate Anita's point. There is another way to complete the mission, an easier way. So, in considering that according to you 75% of players don't even see the strippers, it makes their inclusion even more frivolous, and one could say that they were actually included as background decoration.
There are cops everywhere, and you know what? He doesn't give a flying fuck.
That's why he cops all the cops. They are not about to fuck with him when he gives them free titties every night.
I think it's sick.
We can take the time to listen to these hookers or strippers or whatever they are. They're probably both. Let's just be honest.
Hey, look, you just gotta entertain his friends. Don't let them think they own you. And just think of something positive.
So these girls, they're strippers, but you know they might not be in the best circumstances in the world. It's just, you know, that's just the way it is.
Tell me, what purpose does it serve to force the player to listen to that? Why couldn't the strippers have just not said anything at all? The developers went out of their way to make it clear that the strippers are being objectified within the context of the game, as if just being background decoration wasn't enough. Anita has never said that for women to be objectified in games, the player has to actively participate in the objectification, only that the objectification exists within the game.
Now, inevitably, whenever these game mechanics are criticized, some gamers try to dismiss and distance themselves from the issue by insisting that they don't personally partake in the provided options for exploiting virtual women. But whether or not an individual player chooses to use an object for its intended purpose is irrelevant, because that object was still designed and placed in the game environment to fulfill its function.
She then presumably goes and kills the dancers herself and drags their bodies around so she can claim this.
The player cannot help but treat these female bodies as things to be acted upon, because they were designed, constructed, and placed in the environment for that singular purpose. Players are meant to derive a perverse pleasure from desecrating the bodies of unsuspecting virtual female characters.
So, on the one hand, we have you who was criticizing her for creating her own footage. Meanwhile, there are others who criticize her for using other people's footage. Tell me, what kind of footage is she allowed to use? For the purposes of illustrating her point, it doesn't matter where the footage comes from. And I've always assumed, like any reasonable person would, that she uses a combination of both.
The player cannot help but treat these female bodies as things to be acted upon.
Tip for skeptics. If you want to avoid straw man arguments, always try to give your opponent the benefit of the doubt and endeavor to ensure your interpretations of their claims are accurate.
The player cannot help but treat these female bodies as things to be acted upon.
She is obviously not talking about the player who is playing the game in the gameplay footage. She means it figuratively. She also isn't implying that all players would act that way.
She then presumably goes and kills the dancers herself and drags their bodies around so she can claim this.
The player cannot help but treat these female bodies as things to be acted upon.
Straw man. An argument based on a misrepresentation of an opponent's position.
Claiming, as Anita does, that just because you can, that you are actually invited and encouraged to do it.
The game makers have set up a series of possible scenarios involving vulnerable, eroticized female characters. Players are then invited to explore and exploit those situations during their playthrough.
She never claimed that they were encouraged to attack the NPCs. But she did say,
I should note that this kind of misogynistic behavior isn't always mandatory. Often it's player-directed, but it is always implicitly encouraged.
as far as I can see, you can either ignore them, relegating them to background decoration, or engage with them violently, because that's the only way the player can interact with them. Implicit encouragement is probably the nicest way to say it, considering no other options exist. And what about this gem from Hitman Sniper Challenge, which is a standalone subgame of Hitman Absolution that comes with certain versions of the game?
Alright, so this time we're going to get the WOW challenge, which is to destroy all 3 pieces of hooker evidence, or stripper evidence, or prostitute evidence. I just said 3 words that all mean the same thing. Anyway, so one is up there on the right, it's the boot. One is here on top of the bear. It's a hat, I guess. If she's got a cowboy boot, she probably has a cowboy hat. The last one is here on this bench over here near the pool, which has got lily pads in it. Someone needs to clean that pool. So that's it. Those are the 3. But what I noticed, and I will share with you, is if you hit those 3 things, then you actually get to watch the stripper, hooker, prostitute, dancer, cheerleader lady who's not totally unattractive, minus the, you know, STDs and the smells and the... It's gross. Anyway, so here's a free show.
Now, I'm not about to perpetuate a hasty generalization by claiming that all gamers think like this player, but it does help to demonstrate how this kind of objectification might be interpreted by some players. My real point here is that this Easter egg rewards the user by allowing them to watch a striptease literally down the barrel of a sniper rifle. What do you think is being implicitly encouraged there?
These active viewing mechanics encourage players to collaborate with developers in sexual objectification by enabling gamers to scope out and spy on non-playable sex objects.
Every club has one like
2 very clear examples is where she used the game Watch Dogs. On the very mission where you have to try and shut down a sex trafficking ring. Well, how can you possibly portray that as objectifying women?
Wow, Thunderfoot. Wow. You really don't get it, do you? You were trying to refute something that is clearly going right over your head. She can claim that it objectifies women because the women in that game are being displayed like sexual objects in a room full of men. They're topless, motionless, and being degraded right in plain view of the player. Within the context of the game, it is clear that they are being judged. The player doesn't have to do anything. The point is that the player is being exposed to women being objectified, and the fact that the player is there to rescue them only further reinforces their portrayal as both objects and victims, because they don't have the ability to save themselves. Just like we learned about the strippers in Hitman by listening to their conversations.
She takes a mission where you're trying to shut down a sex trafficking ring and portrays that as sexist.
If you look closely, you can even see one of them being herded off stage through a fence, like cattle. The game developers could have very easily designed a mission where the player gets to shut down a sex trafficking ring without the player being able to walk right past this exhibition, but they didn't, and that's the point. The actions of the player are irrelevant. The purpose of the mission is irrelevant. Women are being objectified right in front of your face, and the fact that you don't see it is why people like Anita are speaking up. This is just another example of you actually illustrating her point. Now, you've attempted to debunk her use of those 2 games in her video, and have utterly failed. Care to take a stab at the other 50?
The sad thing here is just how many people she's duped. She was given an ambassador's award at a game developers convention.
Yes, she received a reward, and I can see that angers you. Well, you know what? She's going to receive many more. But you go ahead, confident in your belief that you have some kind of special knowledge that we're not privy to. Just like every conspiracy theorist out there, you know the truth, and the rest of us, we're the ones who are being duped.
The Ambassador Award honors an individual who has helped the game industry advance to a better place. Anita Sarkeesian's work has done just that.
So why then did I decide to make this video? Why now? Why 2 months after you created your busted video? This is why.
How does it feel to be a liar, you bitch? You cunt, whore, piece of shit, lying skank? What, you think it's insulting? How about your lies about Hitman game uncovered by Thunderf00t in his YouTube video, as well as other lies or manipulations? Go ahead, screen capture this and tweet it, you piece of shit. I know you won't, because then people will actually go watch the Thunderf00t's video and find out what a lying cunt you are. You're welcome.
Do you see the kind of reactions your videos are eliciting? If this doesn't bother you, then how do you feel about it considering your main arguments and accusations were so easily demolished? You are misleading your viewers, manufacturing outrage, and the result is what you see here. It would appear that at least some of the harassment she is receiving is not because people disagree with her, but because your videos get them so charged up that they decide to lash out at her. In fact, it probably doesn't even matter if they watch her videos at all, so long as they watch yours. Is this the kind of legacy you want? To be the mouthpiece for those who would rather resort to harassment, threats, and name-calling than take the time to actually understand the points being made and counter them using reasoned arguments? Do I have to remind you that the constant barrage of insults, accusations, slurs, rapey comments, and threats are all coming from your side of the fence? Are you raising the level of discourse here, or are you lowering it?
She's had to turn off her comments and hide her like-dislike ratio. This is not okay. Please watch this video and share.
No, Anna. The reason that she disables comments is because if she doesn't, people will simply point them to videos like this one, where it is outrageously black and white clear just how dishonest she has been.
It would appear as though Anita herself has disproved your point on this one, at least twice, by tweeting some of the colorful comments she has received by your viewers. She has 125,000 followers, and combined those tweets were retweeted nearly 1,500 times. She clearly has no problem directing people to your videos. She is not afraid of you at all.
Apparently she's now so threatened online that she's had to move house, to which I simply call bullshit.
Thunderf00t, it should go without saying that it is not up to you to decide for Anita and her family what is and isn't a reasonable response to any threat.
There are no credible threats really against feminists at all, let alone against Anita Sarkeesian for her criticisms of gaming.
First of all, we only know what Anita publishes. There could easily be more to this story, but that doesn't matter to you. You think there are no credible threats because no one in her position has been killed yet. Non sequitur. An argument in which its conclusion does not follow from its premises. The conclusion could be either true or false, but the argument is fallacious because there is a disconnection between the premise and the conclusion. Just because it hasn't happened yet doesn't mean it can't or won't.
I mean, seriously, let's Salman Rushdie, he had real cause to go into hiding. Anita Sarkeesian doesn't, because there have been critics of Islam who have been stabbed to death in the streets. There have been no critics of gaming who have been stabbed to death or killed in any way.
Why are you so focused on death? Is it because that's the only thing you as a man have to fear? Anita, being a woman, has a lot more to fear than that. What about stalking, sexual assault, and rape? That certainly has happened before. Therefore, by your own definition, those threats are credible.
She releases this story the same day or the day afterwards about how she is now so bullied online. Yes, we're back to the professional victimhood because the last video was a comparative flop. So what do we need to coincide with the release of the new video? How she's the victim again.
Ever heard of the expression, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence? You might not think that claiming she's a professional victim is an extraordinary claim, but I certainly do. I would never make such an accusation against someone without some pretty solid evidence. By saying she's playing the professional victim, you imply that at some level she wants to be treated this way. This can be interpreted by your viewers as meaning that it's okay to treat her this way, or that it's her fault if she does get treated that way. Do you not see anything wrong with that? Doesn't that sound a lot like the kind of thing feminists have been trying to tell you for years? You are implicitly blaming the victim, and doing so without any substantive evidence.
But for Anita Sarkeesian, this is such a terrible mortal threat for her that she had to leave her house.
And no, the fact that she tweeted about her nonprofit less than 24 hours after talking about her threats does not even come close to evidence. Do you honestly believe she's exploiting the threats for personal gain? If so, let's explore the facts. Unlike you, who has a Patreon account, where supporters hand over money and don't get to see what you do with it, meaning you can just pocket as much of it as you want, Anita has gone a different route by creating a 501c3 charity. The organization must not be organized or operated for the benefit of private interests, and no part of a Section 501c3 organization's net earnings may inure to the benefit of any private shareholder or individual. If she is trying to use her professional victimhood and threats for personal gain, she sure is going about it all wrong, wouldn't you say? I have to stop here. I could go on, I really could. I've seen some of your other videos and tweets, and I could demolish a lot of them just as easily. The sad part is, I shouldn't have to. You're a smart man. Anita only has a communications degree.
Ah, yes, the communications degree, the intellectual heavyweight of our time.
Oh, your playing days are over, my friend. But you can always fall back on your degree in communications. Oh, dear Lord.
I know. It's funny, Major. Lubchenko learned nothing. Nothing.
And that's pretty much the way that it worked with Anita Sarkeesian in gaming.
If education is so important, then how come your PhD hasn't helped you to see your own confirmation bias and motivated reasoning? Maybe you need a reminder. Confirmation bias. The tendency to favor information that confirms one's beliefs or hypotheses and to ignore information that disagrees with one's point of view. Motivated reasoning. The tendency to confirm one's beliefs while ignoring contrary data by developing elaborate rationalizations to justify holding beliefs that logic and evidence have shown to be wrong. Why do I have to take time out of my life to try and spoon-feed you a dose of reality? To help you answer that question, I want you to find a nice, relaxing environment, one where you feel most at peace. Get nice and comfortable, pour yourself a glass of whatever helps you relax, and ask yourself the following question. Is it at all possible that a gradual snowball effect that began when you were kicked out of free thought blogs has led you to build up this entire narrative against feminism, where you have cocooned yourself inside this echo chamber as a way to avoid admitting that you were wrong? Because honestly, that's what it looks like. I mean, have you even considered the possibility that you could be wrong? But if that's not the reason, then what is? What could reduce a highly educated scientist and self-proclaimed rational thinker like yourself to produce what I can only describe as propaganda? You are fooling yourself, Thunderfoot, and in the process, you are fooling others as well.
You were taken in hook, line, and sinker, along with many others, into believing something that is simply bullshit.
The tides are starting to turn against you, and I'm sorry to have to be the one to tell you this, but you are on the wrong side of this issue. Yes, there is a debate going on, but the debate we are having bears no resemblance to the debate you think is going on. The debate you think is going on exists solely in your mind. The dialogue the rest of us are having is worth having, and no amount of insults, threats, or harassment is going to change that, because what you are trying to fight against, whether you realize it or not, is progress, and that's why you're eventually going to lose. The issue here, and now I'm talking especially to the gamers in your audience, is that you've become so accustomed to your privilege that you don't even know it's there. But that unchallenged privilege that you have enjoyed for most of your life is now causing you to interpret any criticism about something you love as if it were criticism and attacks directed at you personally. No one is going to take away your video games. No one wants to. Anita isn't trying to outlaw, restrict, or impose anything on anybody. She isn't trying to stop anyone from making, playing, or enjoying the games you love. She isn't accusing you of being sexist for playing those games, and she isn't trying to attack any game in particular, or games, or gamers, or gaming in general. What she's trying to do is start a discussion about how women are portrayed in video games, and how that might affect real-world women and men. If you disagree with her, then address and refute her arguments directly. Please, just listen to what she is actually saying, instead of assuming you know what she really means.
So why does any of this matter? What's the real harm in sexually objectifying women? Well, the negative impacts of sexual objectification have been studied extensively over the years, and the effects on people of all genders are quite clear and very serious. Research has consistently found that exposure to these types of images negatively impacts perceptions and beliefs about real-world women, and reinforces harmful myths about sexual violence. We know that women tend to internalize these types of images and self-objectify. When women begin to think of themselves as objects and treat themselves accordingly, it results in all kinds of social issues. Everything from eating disorders to clinical depression, from body shame to habitual body monitoring. We also see distinct decreases in self-worth, life satisfaction, and cognitive functioning. But the negative effects on men are just as alarming, albeit in slightly different ways. Studies have found, for example, that after having viewed sexually objectified female bodies, men in particular tend to view women as less intelligent, less competent, and disturbingly express less concern for their physical well-being or safety. Furthermore, this perception is not limited only to sexualized women. In what's called the spillover effect, these sexist attitudes carry over to perceptions of all women as a group, regardless of their attire, activities, or professions. Researchers have also found that after long-term exposure to hypersexualized images, people of all genders tend to be more tolerant of the sexual harassment of women, and more readily accept rape myths, including the belief that sexually assaulted women were asking for it, deserved it, or are the ones to blame for being victimized. In other words, viewing media that frames women as objects or sexual playthings profoundly impacts how real-life women are perceived and treated in the world around us.
If you think she's lying, then read the research and do some research of your own. Put together some actual facts and make a valid counter-argument. No more ad hominems, logical fallacies, or unsubstantiated claims. Now, before you or someone else tries to misrepresent me, I will point out that I don't agree with everything every feminist says, nor do I agree with everything Anita has said, and I do agree with some of the things that I've heard from men's rights activists. The fact is, I don't care who is saying what, as long as the what being said makes rational sense and is presented with supporting evidence. It is because of people like you that I can no longer identify myself as a feminist, because that term has been misrepresented and contorted beyond recognition. So I default back to simply being a humanist who believes that the problems facing women today are worse than the problems facing men. That's not to say that men aren't also facing problems, but I'm just personally less interested in their problems. I will let someone else fight for that cause, and I wish them well. But we don't have to be wrong for them to be right. The kind of feminism I subscribe to isn't anti-male, nor is it trying to oppress men. And apparently I have to be the one to tell you that that's the kind of feminism most of us subscribe to. Men's rights activists and feminists could be working together. Their causes perfectly complement each other. But instead we have people on both sides who would rather argue over each other than actually try to make a difference. Anita is one of those people who are trying to make a difference, while you are one of the people just trying to argue over her. That's why she's ignoring you. So, the question remains, what are you going to do now, Thunderfoot? Will you entrench yourself even deeper in your beliefs and succumb to the backfire effect like those you used to speak out against? The backfire effect. In the face of contradictory evidence, established beliefs do not change, but actually get stronger. Or are you going to actually listen to what's being said honestly? Look at the facts, evaluate the available evidence, and come up with some well-reasoned arguments, like the scientist you are supposed to be. In closing, I leave you with these words of wisdom. The true beauty of a self-inquiring sentient universe is lost on those who elect to walk the intellectually vacuous path of comfortable, paranoid fantasies. I couldn't agree more.